Now up until this point we've been talking about the variable fields in a markable record, and these are basically fields where you can enter free text information, and it's information that's meant to be read by humans, by users of the catalog. Catalog records also contain fixed length data elements, and these are more just codes, they're letters or numbers that are really meant to be interpreted more by the computer than by humans, but they can be used to do things like filter results in your catalog or limit searches, things like that. There are three different fields that these fixed length data elements go in: the 008, 007, and 006 fields. And before we get started with all of these, I just wanted to point out that you definitely don't have to memorize all of these codes. As you get familiar with working with a certain type of item, you will get more familiar with them and they will become kind of part of your memory, but there are places you can look them up. OCLC Bibliographic Formats and Standards is a very good resource. It's, if you click on the help button when you're cataloging in OCLC Connection, that's what you'll be taken to. The Library of Congress MARC website is also a good resource where you can look these codes up. Let's start with the 008 field, which is where a lot of the fixed fields are. This is how it will look in OCLC Connection if you are a user of that. They're kind of broken down into the individual elements that represent different types of information. But it might look different in your local system. This is a screenshot from the Mandarin system that the Library Commission uses, and in the record itself all the codes are run together into one big long string, and that's actually how the computer interprets the information. But we can double click on it and break it down into the individual elements with the definition of what each one is, so that's a lot easier to work with. So this might look a little bit different depending on what system you use, and I'm going to be using how it looks in Connection a lot, but if you're not a Connection user, don't worry, the information will still be relevant to you. Now there are some elements in the 008 that are relevant or they have the same meaning for all different types of items, and we're going to talk about some of those. And then there are some that have specific meanings to video recordings, and we'll talk about those too. I'm going to start by talking about the ones that have the same meaning for all items but might be handled slightly differently for video recordings. And one of those is the type of date or publication status field. If you have OCLC Connection, you can see it's the one that's abbreviated DTST. And most of the time you will see S in here for a single date when an item was simply just released on one single date. What you might see occasionally with video recordings is P for distribution production date, and that would indicate that you're cataloging perhaps a videotape or a DVD, but it has the exact same content that appeared on the original form of the item, for example, the motion picture, the film that came out originally. If it has anything added to it, even closed captions or bonus features that come on DVDs a lot, then it's not the exact same content, and so you just go ahead and use the S for single date for when the DVD or whatever it is that you are cataloging was released. Kind of going along with that are the elements that represent dates related to the item. Kind of going along with that last element are the fields that represent the dates related to the item. If you used an S for single date in the previous field that we discussed, then you're just going to have one date in here. That'll be the date that the item you are cataloging was released. If you used P in that last field, you'll need two dates, and give the date of the item you're cataloging first, and then give the date of the original item, which should be mentioned in a note in your record somewhere. Another field that applies to all types of items, but is definitely used for video recordings, is the place of publication. And there's a three-letter code that goes in this field. It's the one that's labeled country if you use OCLC Connection. And you can get this code from the MARC code list for countries that I've given you the web address for there. For items that are published outside the United States, the code will represent the country, but for items that are published within our own country, it represents both the state and the country. So in this case, that CAU code stands for California and the United States. So a lot of those things that we were looking at before were produced in California, so that is what the code would be for one of those items. Another relevant code is the language of the item. I made reference to this before when we were talking about the language codes in the 041 field. And this is the language that the item is in. And again, it's a three-letter code. there is a mark code list for languages as well, and the URL for that is there. And items that are in English get the code ENG. Now we'll move on to the elements that have specific meanings relating to video recordings. And one of those is for running time. Obviously not all items. Books, for example, will not have a running time. So this is specific to video recordings. And in this place you put the running time in number of minutes. So this one was obviously for a multiple disc set or something like that, and so it has quite a long running time, but you put whatever the running time, the total running time for the item you're cataloging is. There is another field for the target audience of an item, and here are the values that could possibly be used in this element. You can see there's a number of different options here. A lot of times you'll see G for general. F is specialized if it's marketed towards a specific audience. Like a lot of the things that we catalog here at the Library Commission are professional materials for librarians, so we consider those to be specialized. And you'll see J for juvenile for kids materials, or you can get more specific with a number of those values listed near the top of the list. But you can leave it blank if the audience is unknown or unspecified. Now there's also an element for the form of the item. And most of the time with video recordings this will be left blank. But if you are doing streaming videos, you would want to put an O in here for online. Another code is type of visual material. Video recordings, I think we mentioned this at the very beginning in week 1, are a subset of visual materials, so you need to somewhere specify that this is a video recording, and this type of material element is where you do that, and the code for a video recording is V. So for all the items that we talked about, the code in this element will be V. And then technique is the last one that is relevant to video recordings. And this is used to specify whether an item is animated or live action. And so you can see the codes there. If it's animation, use A. If it's live action, use L. And if it's a mix that includes both, use C. So those were the fields in the 008 field, which all video recordings will use. Now, there also will be an 007 field for all video recordings. An 007 field is used to supply types of information that can't be reflected in the 008 field. The codes represent totally different things, and it's used, and it can represent different things for a number of different types of items. So we will be looking at the values for video recordings. Now in OCLC connection, the 007 appears across the top of the variable fields, and the different codes are referred to by what subfield they go in. So I'll be making mention of those. However, in your local system, you may not necessarily see subfields. You'll see them referred to by the name of what they represent, so I will be sure to mention those as well. So in subfield A, according to OCLC, we have the category of material, and that will always be V for video recording, no matter what type of video recording you're working with. Subfield B represents the SMD, or specific material designation. There's a few different options for this. You can have a V for video cassette, D for video disc, or Z for other, which would be applicable to streaming videos. Subfield D is where you put the information about the color of the item. The most common will be B for black and white, or M for multicolored. And subfield E is where format goes, and you get a little bit more specific than the SMD. The values you'll most likely see for this would be B for VHS tape, S for Blu-ray disc, V for DVD, and Z for others. This is one of the few places where you'll see a distinction made between Blu-ray discs and DVDs, for example, so that could be useful for sorting results in your catalog. Here are a few more subfields from the 007 field. Subfield F is where you put information about the sound, whether it is on the medium or recorded separately for the medium. Most of the time you'll probably see A for sound on medium, but you could also see B for sound separate. If the medium does contain the sound, which it most likely will, in subfield G, you would specify again what that medium is, so H for videotape, I for video disc, or Z for other, which would include streaming videos. In subfield H, you have the dimension of the item. There is a specific subfield O, or a code O for a ½ inch, which would be the VHS tape. But pretty much everything else you're working with would go under Z for other. There's no specific value for video discs or streaming videos, so Z will be used a lot. And subfield I is used for configuration of playback channels, meaning is it in stereo or mono. So M for monaural and S for stereophonic you'll probably see most often. There is also the option for unknown or for other. So those were the values of the 007 field reflecting video recordings. Now where it gets kind of tricky is with streaming videos, you need two separate 007 fields. You need one to represent the characteristics as a video recording, and one to represent your item's characteristics as an electronic resource. So these are the values for a second 007, which would only be used for streaming videos. Remember, you don't need to worry about this for DVDs or Blu-rays or anything like that. So subfield A is still category of material, and this time we use C for electronic resource. Subfield B is the SMD, and we use R for remote, because we're not accessing directly from a CD-ROM or something. We're getting it remotely online. D, again, we're dealing with color, B for black and white or C for multicolored. E has information about dimensions, but you'll always use N for not applicable with streaming videos because they're online. They don't really have dimensions. There's no physical carrier to measure. F indicates whether or not it has sound. Leave it blank for no sound or use the code A for sound. And H is used to indicate the file formats. Use A if there's only one type of file that this video appears in, or use M if there are multiple file formats. The last thing we're going to talk about is the 006 field. And again, just like that second 007 field, this is only relevant to streaming videos. And this is used to represent some aspects of the item that can't be reflected in the 008. They represent the same types of information in the 008, but they need to be repeated to reflect the computer resource aspect of a streaming video. Now you'll see from this example from OCLC, it can appear kind of in a string here, and there's not too many codes used. We'll only be looking at two of them. And here again is how it appears in our local system here at the Library Commission, and they're broken down with the definitions of the types of codes. And we're going to be looking at form of material and type of computer file. So the only two things you need to remember about the 006 is type of material, we're using M for computer file, and for type of computer file we're going to say C for representational. So those are the only two codes you need to know for the 006 field if you're cataloging a streaming video.